welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we got paragraph 2 of the Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel. Hegel. Hegel, or however you say his name. Very excited about this. I've been looking forward to this all week. Not gonna lie, this is very fun for me. So this is not gonna be a 15-minute video. We're gonna just go through this entire video today. I think I'm gonna do it for this part of the series. This uh, read through the book because it's already gonna be very long. So just every video is gonna be the whole video. But anyways, let's get into it. If you want to see the last episode, they'll be up there in the cards or whatever. So let's do it.
Furthermore, the very attempt to define how a philosophical work is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter drags in an extraneous concern. What is really important for the cognition of truth is
So if you remember, I probably should have recapped the last episode just for myself because I haven't even looked at it since last week. Um, we're talking about how you can't really make a preface, right, to a philosophical book. You can't really have a forward or something talking about what this book is going to cover, because the whole practice of philosophy is a practice in thought, a practice in trying to figure out what are the quote unquote universals, what are the particulars, what are the things that we can agree upon and can't agree upon, and you know um, how to have a dialectic or a conversation about you know um, what what we're trying to learn here. But he's doing that by making a preface. So it's a kind of a funny type of thing here. So here, furthermore, the very attempt to define a philosophical way is supposed to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject. Yeah. So to me, this seems like he's saying, by creating a preface or kind of defining what this work is going to be about, you're kind of obscuring the act of of truth seeking, the act of looking for what the truth is going to be, right? The act of thinking, and which is a very interesting take. And again, once again, it's all meta because he's doing this, while he's saying this while writing a preface.
obscured. The more conventional opinion gets fixated on the antithesis of truth and falsity, the more it tends to expect a given philosophical system to be either accepted or contradicted.
Mm.
Hence, it finds only acceptance or rejection.
Ooh, this is interesting. This is interesting to me because especially nowadays, right? In our modern times, there's a huge kind of problem with binary, with thinking that you're either for them or against them, right? You're either for us or against us. You're over here or you're over there. It's either right or you're wrong, right? You always have these binary things, but in actuality, especially when you're in the practice of seeking truth, right? It's usually a nuance. It's usually a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and a little bit of over there, which nobody thought about, right? And and so if you try to make a forward, a preface saying this is what this book is about, then what you're actually doing is saying, agree with me here, right? Or look, expect this sort of thing. And so it kind of biases you, right? It sets you up to either agree or disagree, which is problematic because in the practice of cognition, in the practice of thinking, you don't really want to agree or disagree. You just want to see what's out there, right? You just want to try and discover, right? You don't really know what is a correct or incorrect. You're just trying to learn. So this is very interesting here. He points this out.
It does not comprehend the diversity of philosophical systems as the progressive unfolding of truth, but rather sees in its simple
Exactly right.
disagreements the bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter.
Mm.
Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead.
Oh wow, hold up. What? The bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom. and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Basically what we were saying before, but I just like how he puts in this poetic, kind of fashion and kind of nature, showing how when you're having a discourse about something, you're trying to get to the truth of something. If you are just trying to agree or disagree, then the fruit of that conversation will be whether or not you agree or disagree rather than the conversation itself, right? And I think that's an interesting point because like I said before, like he was saying, philosophy is like this discourse, is this dialectic. And so if you're just trying to agree or disagree, you're not really having a dialectic. You're just, confusing, the one piece of it, one piece of the dialectic with the whole thing. When in actuality, whether you agree or disagree doesn't really matter, or it doesn't matter as much as if you are having the conversation itself. So
False manifestation
interesting.
of the plant. And the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, they also supplant one another as mutually incompatible.
Mm,
Yet, at the same time, their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary as the other.
mm,
And this mutual necessity alone constitutes the life of the whole.
mm.
He who
It reminds me of just the holisticism. Basically, having a holistic approach, realizing that the sum of the parts type of thing. I forgot the exact quote, but like the parts does not make up the is not more important than the whole, and the whole is also a sum of the parts, right? So you have to look at both. You can't just look at the parts and saying, oh, this is what it is. You can't define something by just its parts. You have to look at the whole thing. You have to look at the whole picture, because if you just look at one or the other, you're not getting the whole picture, right? You can't really define it that way. So that's an interesting approach. Once again, if you don't like me pausing it, whatever, think I'm pausing it too much, this is me trying to digest this stuff and trying to understand this stuff. If you wanted to do it your own way, then go. You see this video, you can go, Google it and you look it up and watch it yourself.
who rejects a philosophical system, that is, the new philosophy, does not usually comprehend what he is doing in this way, and he who grasps the contradiction between them, that is, the historians of philosophy, does not, as a general rule, know how to free it from its one sidedness
Mm,
or maintain it in its freedom by recognizing the reciprocally necessary moments that take shape as a conflict and seeming incompatibility.
mm, goodness, that's crazy, right? That's deep
One thing
already
that
just in the
philosophers
preface.
often feel compelled to do, or actually are compelled by other people to do, is to clarify where they fit into the history of philosophy up until that point. That
I
is,
might go
to
ahead and speed this
show
part up.
where they fit
I
in
got a lot
with
to
the
cover
other
here.
figures, the other modes of thought, the other approaches. And if you're contributing something new, you really need to explain not only how what you're doing is different than what other people are doing, but why anyone should listen to you, why what you're doing is advance on other people. So Hegel himself is being asked, like everybody else, to do this. And he's saying, I really can't do that effectively in a preface. This is another reason why philosophy prefaces don't work quite as well as they want to. So he says, um, the very attempt to define how a philosophical work is going to be connected with other efforts to deal with the same subject matter. Notice that could be not just philosophical works, but depending on what kind of philosopher you are, that could be works in cognitive science, that could be works in linguistics, that could be works in history,
Hmm.
that could be works in religious studies or theology. So long as you have to clarify how you differ from, or in advance upon, provide a critique of, can respond to, we could go through a whole bunch of different qualifications that way.
Right.
Other people who are doing the same thing, there's going to be some sort of issue here. And he says, um, this is an extraneous concern and it obscures the truth. Why? Well, because conventional ways of looking at things get fixated on what he calls the antithesis. Antithesis between what? We'll talk about what an antithesis means in a moment. Between truth and falsehood. So let's take one example from we'll take two examples from the history of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Plato or Aristotle. Which one is right? Which one is true? Which one is false? Well, about what?
Right.
Now, for example, is there a form of the good out there? Plato thought that there was. Aristotle says, no, that really doesn't make sense. So Plato looked like he was true, but really his position is false, and Aristotle's position is true. So if that's the case, well, why bother reading Plato? You're going to get everything you need by reading, say, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he's criticizing the notion of form of good or the metaphysics, and in a few other things. Why bother with the Plato?
You
Well,
have to
because
understand
this is
the
actually a
arguments.
superficial way of looking at things. It's a
Mm-hmm.
misguided way of looking at things. What would be another example? Innate knowledge. Do we possess innate knowledge? The rationalists said yes, at least about certain things. The empiricists said no. One of them is right, one of them is wrong. We just need to figure out which one is the case, and then we know which one to assign to the dustbin of history and which one to elevate on the pedestal of truth. Hegel says no, it's not really like that. The more conventional opinion, the more conventional way of doing things, gets fixated on this. And I see a lot of students, and I see a lot of interlocutors, and I see a lot of philosophers do this myself. And they tend to expect of a given philosophical system to be either accepted, or contradicted. Contradicted to by what? Contradicted by that which is accepted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this antithesis, this off on, this either or setup.
A binary. I told you.
Not just its parts, but a whole system. Like say Platonism or Aristotelianism has to be either accepted or contradicted. And this is a very dogmatic way of doing things. You know, you could say, well, Aristotle was a rejection of Plato, an improvement on Plato, so he contradicted Plato, and Plato is now in the false position. And then Aristotle goes wrong for a while, and depending on which history philosophy you want to read, maybe it's the Stoics who actually take on Aristotle and say, no, Aristotle's wrong about this stuff, or it's the Aristotle of the Middle Ages, not actually the true Aristotle of the Middle Ages, but Aristotle moribund scholasticism, which is rejected by the early moderns, and Aristotle goes from being accepted to the contradicted part. Now he's
Right, nowhere else.
Descartes and Spinoza and Hobbes and people like that in there. Locke. Hegel thinks, no, that's not really the way to approach philosophy and philosophical systems. Why? We want to think about what he calls the diversity of philosophical systems. There is always a number of different alternatives, at least by the time that we're doing philosophy, available to us.
Well, diversity is a bad word, you know.
Philosophy class should introduce you to at least a few of these on a few topics. So how should we understand this diversity? Is it just a matter of these antitheses, where something is accepted for a while and then it gets contradicted, and now we no longer bother with it, and we have to look at whatever new is accepted? Well, what if things go into a blind alley? That happens occasionally. He's not actually talking about this in this section, but we can think about, are there times in philosophy where philosophy actually goes off course and can't adequately even understand what its own business is, where it narrows its viewpoint a bit too much? So he says, what we need to see instead of this antithesis is we need to see the diversity of philosophical systems as what he calls a progressive unfolding of truth. Another way of putting this is development.
How things change over time, and how we learn, what is right, what is wrong.
More mature state.
How we learn how to learn how to reason, right? I think that's super important, and that's kind of like a lot of what we're missing today. And that's interesting too, because that's a lot of what people criticize about the education system today, is that we are too focused on, oh, what's right and what's wrong, right? What's this and what's that, rather than teaching people how to think. We try to teach people what to think, right? And you hear that all the time. Like, why are we teaching people what to think? We should teach people how to think. Well, this is why, right? People don't even respect philosophy. When you say, oh, are you going to major in philosophy? Like, what are you going to do with that, right? And you hear it all the time. And this is why, like, if your society, if your culture doesn't value philosophy, if people aren't, even at the highest levels, right, aren't valuing philosophy, if scholars are not even viewing philosophy as a dialectic, right, as a conversation, and are only viewing it as a way to prove somebody right or wrong, then what do we have, right? We have this binary, we have this problem of trying to think, teach people what to think rather than how to think. And yeah, I think that's what he's going to get into now. And that development part is like we need to, philosophy is all about the conversation, it's about the practice. It's just like exercising, right? You don't take your, lift some weights and then gain some muscle. You have to do it a lot, right? You have to put your reps in order for you to gain that muscle mass, in order for you to understand how to use your body. You can't just instantly take a pill and just boom, you have your muscles. No, you have to practice it, right? And there's no right way to even gain muscle. It depends on your body type, it depends on your situation, your context, your diet, all this other stuff.
Doing the Hegelian three-step shuffle of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, by taking what's true, looking at what contradicts it, seeing what's true in that, finding a way to bring those two together, and now you got a new stage, and you can keep on doing this. As I said, there would be some blind alleys. Hobbes, for example, might be a blind alley in philosophy. Peter Abelard, as opposed to
I don't know who
Anselm,
these people are. I have to
more of a
look this
blind
up.
alley than Anselm. You know, Anselm is definitely a development over Augustine and Gregory. Um, Aquinas would be an advance past Anselm, synthesizing. By the way, Aquinas' theory of truth, person he talks about next to as much as Aristotle, Anselm. Bringing those together, fusing them, and gradually we get more and
I
more
wonder if this
well-developed
is
things
down
into
here.
philosophy. So he has this metaphor of the bud. The bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom.
I have to look
So
those
the
up.
bud, and buds are green usually, right? And then they get a little tinged with the flower, and now we have this beautiful flower showing forth, and we think, oh wow, it's done. This is so wonderful. But the flower is just like the first step.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of the flower? I mean, this is where it gets really interesting. What's the point of a bud? Just to be a bud by itself? No, it's to bring forth a leaf, or in this case, a flower. And what's the point of the flower? For us to cut off and stick in our houses and give to girlfriends and say, isn't this wonderful? No, it's to produce something else, to be pollinated, for them to exchange back and forth. And then what? Is that the end of the picture? No, it's to produce fruit. And so the fruit is something very different than the bud. He says the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant. Now the fruit emerges from it as the truth of the plant. That's what it was all about. And then we could go on from there perhaps as well. And in philosophy,
Fruit creates a seed,
we don't want to say, well,
creates a new sapling, and all the
just immature
recycling all over again.
or something along those lines. Instead, what we want to be able to do is recognize what was being
When you say
achieved.
Whitehead,
Instead, what we want, Plato was just immature Alfred North Whitehead or something along those lines. Instead, what we want to be able to
interesting. Whitehead's another person I got to look into. I think that is a person who talked about process philosophy, which I've talked about in my podcast a bit, and I definitely want to get into that. That's a very interesting area there.
do is recognize what was being achieved, what was true in that, and then what was the next developmental stage, what was surpassed, and what integrated something from that into it, and showed what the real meaning of it was. That's what Hegel thinks philosophy, dialectical philosophy, developmental philosophy is doing. And so he says there's an organic unity of the entire process in which these things don't conflict. They're not in an antithetical relationship of truth and falsity, of that which is contradicted and that which is being agreed with, but rather they're part of an organic unity in which each is, as we use this term, necessary. The bud is necessary at that stage to lead to the flower.
Exactly.
You're not going to get a flower from a piece of chalk. Right? You could get a flower, I suppose, from a piece of paper, but it's not real flower. It's an origami flower. So this entire process.
So you have to go through that process once again of talking about it, of understanding, these things, of starting from a really basic area, and then kind of bringing more out of it, trying to understand what it is and getting more into it, and from there you can pollinate it, if you will. You can get the fruit from it, right? But that has to start from a certain place, from a simple place. It's not super simple, like it's not off a left field, but you're starting from comparatively simple place than where it is, later on. And you have to go through that process. You can't just jump into having a flower, jump into having a fruit, because then you won't understand how that fruit got there. You don't understand, what that fruit even is or what it can be. So yeah, this is super super interesting.
Is the necessary unfolding of truth. And he says, how do other people approach philosophy? Do they approach it in this way and see it in terms of these long-term, added-on, synthesizing developments? No, the person who rejects a philosophical system often doesn't comprehend what he's doing in this way. He just rejects it. He doesn't see what's really true in it.
Mm.
And then the
See?
person who does see the contradiction between them levels them out and treats them as if they're not in a process of development. Really, strictly speaking, what I should have done is draw this line going upward because you're developing into higher and higher states,
Mm.
something that has greater and greater value, and to a certain extent, greater and greater being, certainly greater and greater levels of truth.
Mm.
So, is that something that you can easily roll into a preface? Can you show this entire pattern of development? No. That's why the preface is just a little bit of a big, thick book. The rest of the work of this development is taking place in the rest of the book.
Mm. Wow. Good stuff.
Demanding and supplying these superficial explanations passes readily enough as a concern with what is essential. Where could the inner meaning of a philosophical work find fuller expression than in its aims and results? And how could these be more exactly known than by distinguishing them from everything else the age brings forth in this sphere?
Right.
Yet, when this activity is taken for more than the mere beginnings of cognition, when it is allowed to pass for actual cognition, then it should be reckoned as no more than a device for evading the real issue, as a way of creating an impression of hard work and serious commitment to the problem, while actually sparing oneself both.
Mm.
For the real issue is not exhausted by stating it as an aim, but by carrying it out, nor is the result the actual whole, but rather the result together with the process through which it came about.
Exactly.
The
Right.
aim, by itself, is a lifeless universal, just as the guiding tendency is a mere drive that as yet lacks an actual existence. And the bare result is the corpse which has left the guiding tendency behind it.
Mm.
Similarly, the specific difference of
This is why I like doing this. Just taking my time with it and digesting it, trying to talk about every sentence, every paragraph. It's part of the process, of understanding what's going on here. Maybe wrong, maybe right. Let's try to have a dialectic, right? Let's try to have a conversation. Let's try to figure out what's going on in the first place before you can pass judgment or anything like that. Let's just practice with it. I want to go back on this here. I really like this. It's very beautiful.
the corpse which has left the guiding tendency behind it.
Oops. Said the aim by itself is a lifeless universal, just as the guiding tendency is a mere drive that as yet lacks an actual existence, and the bare result is the corpse which has left the guiding tendency behind it. That's beautiful, man. Oh man, I don't know why it's just giving me the chills. It's just like, ooh.
Existence. The bare result is the corpse which has left the guiding tendency behind it. Similarly, the specific difference of a thing is rather its limit. It is where the thing stops, or it is what the thing is not. The concern with aim or results, with differentiating and passing judgment on various thinkers, is therefore an easier task than it might seem. For instead of getting involved in the real issue, this kind of activity is always a way beyond it. Instead of tarrying with it and losing itself in it, this kind of knowing is forever grasping at something new.
Mm.
It remains essentially preoccupied with itself, instead of being preoccupied with the real issue and surrendering to it. To judge a thing that has substance and solid worth is quite easy. To comprehend it is much harder. And to blend judgment and comprehension in a definitive description is the hardest thing of all.
Ain't that what I said? That's amazing. That's amazing. This is why it's so fun to, kind of figure these things out. Not only is it like, oh yeah, I got that right, but also it's like, do I understand what he's saying, right? Do I kind of comprehend what he's saying? If you just kind of read through, it's easy to think you understand it, but to not really comprehend it, right? To not really understand it. So if you kind of take your time and actually work through yourself, okay, like, okay, what's he trying to say here? It may take you longer to work through, but at the very least, you can kind of say whether or not you comprehend, right? And again, it's not about being right or wrong per se. It's about trying to grasp, what's being said. And this person has obviously spent a long time, thinking about these things. It's amazing that another human sat down and thought so much about this subject. So if you want to understand their work and their years that have went the years that have went into, this craft, this area of study, and that goes for any book, any subject, any, area. It doesn't have to just be philosophy, but if you want to understand it, like, take your time and try to see, what how did they get to this point. What are they trying to say here? Because you can't just talk to them. Most of these people who written these books, they're dead now. Right? Even the people that's alive, you probably won't be able to talk to them in your lifetime. So at the very least, I think it just is worth it to kind of take your time and go through it. And unfortunately, that does mean that we probably won't be able to read all the books. Right? That's the sad part of it, that there's so much literature out there. All the stuff he just dropped in the last section, I'm not gonna have time to read all of it. I'm gonna look up some summaries every now and then, but I'm not gonna read all of them. Maybe, one or two might sing to me, and I'm like, all right, let me read that. But I'm not gonna read all of them, and that's okay too, right? We don't have to understand everything. We can't understand everything. That's another reason why it's so important to, kind of have this exercise and try to comprehend everything that's going on here, because we can't like you said, it's going to be constant learning. He said here's involved in a real issue instead of tearing with it and losing itself in it. This kind of knowing is forever grasping at something new. It remains essentially preoccupied with itself. So this is always going to be new stuff. There's always going to be more that we're trying to learn, trying to understand from this area. Oh man, this is so cool. I'm such a nerd. Explanation and commentary on the text. Yeah.
So in section three, Hegel is going to bring in a few other important concepts, a few other important themes. And he's already been engaging in criticism of the sort of things that people want a book of philosophy to do and want the preface to do. Now he's criticizing yet another mode of this, and he's saying these people who are just putzing around think they're actually grasping the essential, what's the inner meaning of the work of philosophy. And this should be something fairly easy to articulate. So how would you do that? And he talks about a couple different things you can focus on in this section. A lot of times people will talk about their aims, their goals of what it is that they're doing, and then the results of
Mm.
it. And Hegel says this is not by itself going to work. There's nothing wrong with aims. There's nothing wrong with focusing on results. But these are not going to be the entirety of what he calls the real issue. In German, the Sache selbst, the thing, the matter itself, the
Mm.
real thing that it is that we're concerned with. And he says that this is the idea people have. Where could the inner meaning find fuller expression than in the aims and results, in what it is that they're shooting for, in what it is that they actually do produce? How could these be more exactly known than by distinguishing them from everything else that the age brings forth in the sphere? So, philosophy has different aims, produces different things. It's not, practical science. It's not like the other sciences, which each have their own subject area. These would be, ways of going about this. So he says, when the activity is taken for more than the mere beginnings of cognition, when it's allowed to pass for actual cognition, then it's evading the thing in itself.
Mm.
Because the activity has to be engaging with the real thing, the real issue, the real phenomena that it is that we want to study. I mean, we're going to see him talking about this in just a moment. First, I want to hit on some of the things that he says about aims and results, and also what he calls the guiding tendency. He says, by stating the real issue as an aim. So, for example, if I'm interested in, as he's going to talk about later on, power relations, the relationship between master and slave, or employee and employer, under capitalism, things like that. That's the real issue. And it's not going to be exhausted by just talking about what my goals are and by achieving certain results in the study.
Hmm.
My work may or may not be adequate to what it is that I'm trying to investigate.
This is interesting. This is interesting. I guess we'll get more into that later, but the idea that, again, you know, it's the act of thinking about, the problem. So in this case, thinking about like the employee employer relationship, or master slave relationship. um if we just look at the results, right? We just look at, oh, this is our goal. We wanted to increase profits by this amount, and so we did this, that, and the other, and we got these results, right? If you only judge something based on the aims and the results, then you can very much tread into really, really dark, messed up territory. Because much of human existence, much of human life and consciousness is in the experience itself. It's the means to an end, right? We like to say that, oh, it's just a means to an end, but no, it's a means to an end. If you know what I'm saying, like it's not just the end. It doesn't really. You can't just say, oh, we're doing whatever we can just to get to that finish line, just to get to that end, because the end doesn't really matter. It's what you did to get there. It's the means that you did to get there. And if your means, if the things that you did to achieve that end was not, I'm not, I want to use the terms moral, because I think that kind of gets into problem, a part of this too. Like morals itself is a concept that's more about the aims and results, right? What I'm saying here is the experience, right? The experience of living. If the experience of living is not good, right? It doesn't feel good. It feels insufficient. If people don't have their freedoms, or people are not enjoying the process, then the ends doesn't really matter as much, right? You can achieve the best you can possibly want to achieve, but if the way that you got there was by killing a bunch of people, or by taking a bunch of freedom away and forcing people to live in squalor and all this other stuff, then morals aside, like it was just, what's the point, right? Who benefits from that, really? If nobody else can partake in the process, and only you can benefit, and even if you say, oh, everybody can benefit from my wins, if nobody wants to benefit anymore because you just kind of destroyed their entire life up to this point, again, is what's the point? At least that's how I'm viewing it so far. He might touch on another aspect of this, but I definitely think this is a very important and interesting issue, interesting idea.
Here's one hint too, by the way, about this adequacy thing. One thing that will make it more adequate is when I take into account my own embroilment in that real issue, when I don't regard it as something purely external and outside of myself, when I don't pretend to a kind of objectivity that rules out the importance of subjectivity. But that's for later on. So he says the real issue is not exhausted by stating it as an aim. I want to study power relations. Stating you're going to study power relations, that's not the same thing as actually doing it.
Mm.
And in philosophy, as opposed to some other fields where it's harder to get away with BSing people with this sort of stuff, there are many papers and even many books where somebody says, I'm going to treat this topic exhaustively and I will cover everything and give you a whole new viewpoint on it. And you read through it and you're like, man, that was a waste of my time. I didn't actually learn anything because there wasn't anything new to learn there.
Right.
So
See?
merely saying that you're going to do something is not the same thing as actually doing it. It's not the same thing as engaging with what it is that you're supposed to be coming to understand. Nor is the result the actual whole. Results are more real in a certain respect than goals are, but the result is only what it is because of all the rest of this. So if the result doesn't somehow contain that or retain its relationship to that, remember we're talking about the world of thought here, then the result actually loses what it was the result of. So think, for example.
Yeah, I know he's gonna get into a good example. I just want to say, like, it reminds me of in school when you say, "Oh yeah, write an essay about," or like when you're doing math or something, like, right, show your work, right? When you say, and I think like we don't have to use math because that's more getting to other kind of field, but like for literature or whatever, there's essays or whatever, and you say, "Oh, show your work," write an essay about how you got to this conclusion and stuff like that. A lot of times people just BS their whole way and it's like, "Oh, blah 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 blah," and then this, right? This is my result. This is my conclusion. I'm like, okay, what? Like, how did you get there? Like, a lot of times people have a conclusion that doesn't seem to match, all the reasons that they claim leads to that conclusion. You might see this in YouTube comments or in Twitter, right? People have a conclusion, they have an idea, a result of how the world works, or how something will happen with no, it doesn't really make sense how they got there. And even if it sounds good, right? Even if your conclusion sounds, reasonable, if if people can't really understand how you got there, again, it doesn't really matter. It seems it's less real. It seems less real than it should be, and you can find those real results by engaging in the real issue and the activity of cognition, and saying, okay, this is what I think, this is how I think it will happen, it will happen because of this that, and you're gonna, when people can follow you through that process, you're like, oh, okay, what about this, and you can say, oh, this is going to happen, blah blah blah, right? You have that, once again, that dialectic, you have that conversation, you have that understanding of how something happens, and so the result makes sense, even if it's a wrong result. At least you can say, I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I think you actually went to the wrong conclusion. Here's why, right? Then you can have a better conversation about it. If you just say, oh, here's what's going to happen because this, and you're not open to having a conversation about it, it's just nothing's going to come of it, right? You're just saying opinions, you're just saying stuff.
Of histories of philosophy that just tell you what people thought, and maybe a little bit about their arguments about why they thought that, but really contained nothing of the mind of Descartes or the mind of Spinoza or the
Mm,
mind of Schopenhauer. Um, that's what differentiates a good history of philosophy from a bad history of philosophy,
mm,
by the way.
interesting.
Philosophers are not just reducible to a set of propositions expressed in their works.
I know
They're
this is
human
sped up. I
minds.
like it sped up.
And the result has its value because of the activity that goes into it.
Right.
So, like he says, the aim by itself is a lifeless universal, just as the guiding tendency is a mere drive that as yet lacks an actual existence. The bare result of beautiful mind is a corpse, which has left the guiding tendency behind. The drive, what it was that made you want to get into that in the first place. So then he goes and starts talking about the specific difference of a thing and what differentiates that thing from something else. So he says this concern with aim or results, with differentiating and passing judgment, is an easier task than might seem. When we're looking at the history of philosophy, it's very easy to start classifying people. Oh, these are the empiricists. And empiricists, we all know, must think that everything comes from experience directly. Well, no. As a matter of fact, Locke thinks that there is an inner sense. Hume thinks that things do come from the outside as impressions, and then we work on them as ideas. So it's not
Interesting.
quite so
See?
simple as that. As simple as the, I don't want to say Wikipedia because Wikipedia's gotten a lot better, but the Spark Notes versions of things. So what should we do?
I guess nowadays we could say the Twitter version of things, or the bad YouTube video version of things. Because there's good YouTube videos, but some of them are just like, oh, this is what all the empiricists believe. This is what all the post-constructionists believe. This is what all the postmodernists believe. And like, do they really? And you go in the comments, you're like, oh no, actually, this person thought this, and this person was saying this, that, and the other. And I'm like, huh. This is why I actually started reading Hegel, or which I tried to point out before, is like I was reading, watching something about postmodernism, and people were like, um, I got to that video because in another video they were talking about, from the views of what's his name, uh, Davidson, whatever his name is, and he like watching his videos, you can see how he's conflating everything. It's like, oh, all postmodernists think this, they think blah blah blah, they think there's no point in morals and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, that doesn't sound quite right. Why is that? Why is that so simple or basic? Like, I don't think these philosophers are basic people. Like, they're not, they're not these little basic, folks that just haven't really been thinking about a situation. I'm pretty sure they have a very, nuanced and clear idea of what they're talking about. And so I went and watched this video. People were in this, Tom, I think it was from Tom Nicholas, and he was pointing out that no, this, Davidson is wrong. This is, this philosopher, Derrida was talking about this, Foucault was talking about this, and it was just so interesting. The comments was like, oh yeah, this, that, and the other. So all that to say that, yeah, you can't simplify, you know, different ideas down to just the, you can't just reduce it down to just the Twitter, the tweetables. There might be an idea of generally about what this philosophy is about what a specific subject or type of philosophy is about, but most of the philosophy, right, is the practice of thinking about it, right? If you really want to critique postmodernism or post-structuralism or anything like that, look into what is actually saying, what all the different people are saying, and try to practice it yourself. Try to think about, okay, what if, uh, how we thought the world was working was wrong. What if, things are relative? What if there is no objective sense because we can't experimentally find the objective truth, and that means that this that like practice that situation, like sit down and like try to think about this, or talk about it with your friends. And me, I'm able to do it through my podcast and my videos like this. Like I sit down and think about, okay, what does it mean by that? Like what if, okay, what if this is true? What then you, right, what if, you try to practice that situation. So yeah, I'm fully on board with this. And this is, again, this is so freaking cool. I know I'm nerding out pretty hard here, but this is why I want to do this.
He says, instead of getting involved in the real issue, this sort of activity is always like shooting beyond it. Instead of actually hunkering down and sticking with it and persevering. These are not the terms Hegel's using, but they're pretty darn close in meaning. He talks about tarrying. That means, that tarrying is a little bit more of a leisure word. That means actually like sticking around and seeing what happens. Not saying, oh, you got an appointment, got to take off. Sorry, I'll read the memo. That'll tell me all about what it is that we're talking about here. Or just give me the outline. No, you tarry with it. If you really want to know, well, think about this. If we really want to know what Hegel is talking about, we don't say, look, we're going to do a set of lectures on Hegel. It's going to be 20 hours, and we'll pack in these topics. And if we don't get to other stuff, no big deal. We're going to get to the most essential bits of it. If you really want to fully understand a philosopher, you have to actually hang
Take your
around
time
with
with it.
them. You
Yeah,
have to linger.
exactly. You see.
Engage in the kind of dialogue that becomes possible when they become a companion to you.
Mm-hmm.
Some better companions than others. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy Bentham is kind of dry and dull stuff, and sometimes that's the way with Kant too.
Mm-hmm.
Reading Descartes is always a hell of a lot of fun, but you might actually get more out of reading. Well, you won't get more out of reading Bentham or Kant than Descartes, but they're all pretty much on the same level, I would say. And it goes the same for Hegel as well. If our work in doing philosophy is the activity of thought, and we're trying to make sense out of reality, we don't want to shoot past it. We want to actually spend the amount of time that it requires. What this reminds me of actually is when students will ask me, how much time should I be studying for this class? Or how long should the paper be? And before I started giving them more prescriptive guidelines, I would say, well, the paper needs to be as long as it needs to be to actually adequately treat the subject. And of course, that would bother them because they would say, well, I have no.
You see, like this is exactly what the best I'll be saying, like with education system and everything like that. Like people, especially in America, we want to quick go through everything, commoditize everything, put it in the time, put it in the schedule, and all that stuff. But much of knowledge, right? Much of innovation, creativity, discovery, entrepreneurship, all of that does not follow those guidelines, right? It doesn't follow those strict commoditized, boxes. You have to take your time with things. My friend Austin, shout out to Austin. He talks about the importance of slowing down, right? Of taking your time with something, just thinking about something for a while, and before you make a decision on something, or if you're reading through a book, try not to speed through it every weekend, or just like take your time reading and stuff like that. And I know I'm saying that while I have this at 1.25 speed, and sometimes I watch videos on 2 point speed, but it's not because I want to get through them faster. It's because it's hard for me to focus, and I might have ADHD. I don't know. I haven't like gone to a doctor or anything, but it's hard for me to focus personally if I'm not like directly engaged within hearing everything. If it's too slow, people are talking too slow, it's hard for me to stay engaged in a long period of time. So I really appreciate being able to speed things up, but it's not because I want to get through it faster or get to the next video. Like this is it. Like if I after we get to this video, this is it, and next I'm gonna go, I don't know, figure out something else what I'm gonna do today. I have a schedule, I have time boxes, but it's not set. Like it's just a template, right? It just allows me to go back to, if I find myself going off the rails or not knowing what to do, I just look at my template and be like, okay, this is what I can be doing. But I think it's important to take our time with things, and have an understanding of things. And I kind of wish I had a professor like this if I went to college. Like I didn't go to college. Part of it was most of it because of finances, but afterwards, a lot of it was because I became jaded or disillusioned with college, and realized that a lot of professors, like almost all of my friends, hated their professors, right? Because the professors didn't really want to engage with things. They just say, oh, here's the work, do the work, blah blah blah. I'm just like, man, that seems really terrible. Like for me, I love education. I'm a nerd. Like you can see how I'm engaging with this. Like I was lucky because in high school I had a lot of professors or teachers, that would engage with the subjects, right? They would give us work, and if we said there was too much work for us to do in a specific time, we could talk to them, be like, "Hey, I don't know if we can do all this work. I want to make sure I deliver something really good," and they'd be like, "Okay, fine," right? And there's some nuance there. There's some compromise we can do there. And I was so lucky to have so many teachers that would engage with the subjects, whether it's math or science or history and everything like that, and really took her times to focus on different things and to not try to rush through everything and not try to get the perfect curriculum for everything, so we can really understand what was going on at different in these different subjects. So I really appreciate him saying that. And if I did go to college, I would love to have this man as my professor. He's great.
No idea how long that is. And obviously, Dr. Sadler, you don't either, because you can't tell me in my case. And I said, well, start writing and then find out. That's what Hegel is calling here tearing. Tearing with the real stuff, die Sache selbst, and
Zaken self.
seeing what the phenomena actually reveals to us. So, like he says at the very end of this, to judge a thing that is substance and solid worth is quite easy. It impinges itself upon it. To comprehend it is much harder. What are you doing when you comprehend? Think about it as wrapping. When we have this metaphor that I need to wrap my mind around something. Imagine that your mind is an articulate organ and it can wrap itself with all these tendrils around the thing that you're studying, and that thing probably has got some tendrils of its own that are going to sort of get deep into your mind. That's what comprehension is. That's very different than passing a quick judgment or classifying something or saying, I know what box to put this in.
Beautiful, beautiful. We have way too much of a problem with categorizing things and saying, "Oh, that's what it is. Put it in the box. That okay, we got it. We labeled it, and it's done." I'm like, no, those labels are useful sometimes, but most of the time, if you want to understand something, if you want to, get to the root of problems or comprehend issues or whatever, you have to spend some time with it, right? You have to spend some time with it. Oh my gosh, this was great. I hope you enjoyed it as well. I hope this was as fun for you as it was for me. And I'm not sure if I'm going to go and edit the whole snafu I had earlier, but is what it is. And nobody's watching this anyway, at least not right now. Most of it is for me. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Um, this is great. I'm super looking forward to doing the rest of this series. Gonna try to. I wonder if I should might watch these off stream or just have more days just doing this, because this is really great. This is really fun. I ain't gonna lie. Yeah. Thanks again. Have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.